It is so exciting to see you all here back again for the first time in 2 years, and unmasked, which is new to us in LA, so we're kind of giddy. It's just a new experience. So welcome. I would like to begin our presentation this morning by acknowledging our presence on the ancestral lands of the Gabrielian and Tongva people, and that we acknowledge their presence as the original caretakers and stewards of these lands. Welcome to the 25th anniversary of Masters. These presentations are a big part of the weekend, and when we get to hear from the artists themselves and gain insights into their working methods and process. A combination of technique and talent, perspective and process, these presentations are wonderful opportunities to get to know our artists better, to understand the experiences that have shaped their work, and to gain a greater appreciation of that piece that you may already have in your home, or perhaps you would like to acquire. We have two amazing artists presenting about their work this year, Mick Doellinger and this afternoon, John Moyers. They are a sculptor and a painter respectively known for the time-honored traditions represented therein. And both of our presenters this year represent really, I think, what it is that we strive for with Masters, a show that proves the West of legend is still alive and all around us. A quick reminder, please, to silence your phones for the duration of the presentation. Also, in the highly unlikely event that we need to evacuate at any point, there are some exits over here and to the side of the stage, there and there. And you can see why I did not choose a career in airline flight. Our first presenter this morning, so let me introduce our first presenter this morning. Mick Dollinger is an animal sculptor known for capturing the essence of his subjects in ways that connect his audience to the creatures themselves. Mick made his first sculpture at age 11 and has never looked back, taking his lifelong fascination with wildlife around the globe, from his native Australia to Africa, Europe, and of course here in North America. Wherever he may be and whatever he may be sculpting, his works give audiences a glimpse into the animal's behavior, from the antics of a donkey to the quivering of a dog on point, or, in the case of this year's Masters, one rather satisfied squirrel. Mick has lived in the United States since 2003. He started sculpting taxidermied specimens in the late 1970s and gained international recognition for the physical accuracy and unique artistry, including a layered technique that melds his working knowledge of anatomy and sculpting with a deep understanding of animal behavior and anatomy that he's gleaned from years of guiding and wildlife management in the Australian outback. He believes that all of his time in the field, including the subjects and environments they occupy, is central to his creative process. And as he states in his bio from this year's catalog, quote, "For me, it's less about creating a perfect replica of the animal and more about sculpting a narrative or a moment in time." Dollinger is an elected member of the National Sculpture Society, the Society of Animal Artists, and the California Art Club, and his work can be seen in museums, galleries, and private collections around the world. And with us also this morning, speaking with Mick, is Jim Ray, longtime Autry trustee, collector, and co-chair of the Masters Committee. So thank you, Jim, and welcome, Mick.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Before we get started, I'm going to go a little bit off script here, and I'm just going to give you a brief glimpse that Mick's got a background that is quite unlike just about any other artist I've ever met. And hopefully he's got some stories that are just going to thrill you. So let's get started, Mick. You were always fascinated by animals as a child. Tell us about that.
Yeah, from my earliest recollections, it's all I thought about. It was dogs and horses, man, when I was very young. But I would just, any dogs, if my mother took me shopping and dogs are tied up outside a store, I'd be patting somebody's dog or laying it on the ground, feeling how the scapula, the legs moved and everything. And yeah, I just couldn't get enough. It fingers in the ears, you know, people come out, slap me over the head, leave my dog alone. So I collected snakes and lizards and ferrets and rabbits and stray dogs. and it just went on from there. I had a disconnect with my dad because he didn't have any interest in animals at all. My mother did, so my dad thought I was kind of a weird kid. So that I just wanted to be outside with critters. And that was
When did you
about
start riding horses?
At 5.
Yeah.
5, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. The top one where I'm jumping with the pony, that's 5 years old there. My parents were German immigrants. They got me in lederhosen and sandals, very uncool. So then the picture to the right of maybe the 2 horses, these were milk horses. Up the road from where we lived, there was a dairy that would deliver milk to all these suburban houses, and I'd sneak out there sometimes at night, 2 in the morning, and go out with them and deliver milk. It was a big, seems so bizarre now, there was a big wagon, not with spoke wheels, but truck tires, truck wheels all around, and they'd have all these crates of milk on there, and a step tread on the back. The horse would just trot all around the streets, speed up in some places, slow down in others, and the milkman would just say, 2 bottles there, 2 bottles here, or 3 bottles there. So I loved doing that, but just putting the horses in harness and things like that, just to be around horses, the smell of them, everything amazed me. The bottom left, I'm holding this stallion, a thoroughbred stallion. It was on a place I went for a vacation, work as a kid where they bred thoroughbreds, a stud farm. And the right-hand picture, me hunting rabbits with my dogs. The greyhound was a reject off a racetrack. So I had my dad got pretty upset, all the animals I brought home. So,
okay,
yeah.
Let's talk about some of your early artistic influences.
The bottom, the top left, that's St. George and the Dragon. That's the earliest sculpture I can remember, and it's in front of the library in Melbourne in Australia. The Natural History Museum is right next to it, which any chance I could, I'd get my parents to take me to the Natural History Museum. But this sculpture was out there, and it just powerful piece that just I would be in awe staring at, even at night with the lights on it. And that it looked great in different times of day with the different shadows and that. So that was my earliest recollection. After that, when I was 11, I met this man here, William Ricketts, and he was setting up outside of the city of Melbourne a sculpture garden in the rainforest there, and he had I don't know how many acres, maybe 5 to 10, something like that. But he hadn't been there long. He lived in a little cottage there, and he sculpted Aboriginal people, and these would be torsos. You can see some of them there, cemented onto boulders, and it was all terracotta that he fired himself on location there. And so I was really interested in that. He gave me a blob of clay to sculpt something, and I sculpted this one beneath there, the first sculpture. Obviously not showing much talent at that time. But so I went back after I did that, I guess a week later. I met him three occasions. He didn't give me any instruction at all, but he fired that for me, and he gave me another little sculpture, a real mini one that he had done. So that was really inspiring for me. I just was so excited over that. But I got distracted with animals over time, and this other head is one of his heads, a terracotta head too. But that was from '67. I never went back there until 2009. So all this sanctuary now, a lot of the sculptures are overgrown with moss and that. The government owns it. It's a place where people pay money to go through and take a look at it. But it looks really cool when all the rocks are covered in moss and they look like they're meant to be there.
So your family had some artistic talents, didn't they?
Yeah, my mother always did something. When I was really young, she tooled leather and did some pottery, and then she painted, and she still paints a little. But she didn't know her biological father. My father met him, but he apparently painted some murals in Germany. She had brothers that were wood carvers, figurative wood carvers. I never met any of my grandparents, and didn't see too much from as far as photos went. My parents, when they migrated to Australia in '58, I was 18 months old, but the ship burnt and sunk in the Indian Ocean, so they lost everything. Apparently, they have baggage limits on lifeboats, so. So, yeah, that was about that. Yeah.
Okay. So your first full-time job was as an apprentice butcher. How did that come about?
I had an altercation with my father at 15, and I ran away and worked on a thoroughbred training complex for several weeks, where they just broke in young thoroughbreds, and they had other young kids like myself riding these young horses bareback, because these horses are only like 18 months to 2 years old. You know, their bones aren't fully grown, so they'd want smaller people riding them and be bareback just to keep the weight off them. But did that several weeks, and then came back home, and my father sat me down and said, you know, you've got to do an apprenticeship or something, because, you know, college was not on the cards. I hated school, just hated it, you know. And avoided as much as I could. I got caught so many times, picked up and sent to school, and that police one time even. So, I just wanted to get out of there. So he listed off all the different apprenticeships, and in those days, you know, if you wanted to be a electrician or a plumber or a carpenter, you do an apprenticeship, or a chef. And then he got to the word butcher, and I thought, that sounded cool, because I remember as a kid my mother taking me in butcher shops, and back then they'd have sawdust on the floors, and the smell of the sawdust, and seeing the carcasses or part carcasses hanging on the rails, they fascinated me. All the bones, the lines, the ribs and things I thought was really interesting. So I picked that. He found me a job, and I did an apprenticeship there. And at the time I worked in the butcher shop, it kind of got a little more boring. It was like a retail butchering, where you're serving customers, cutting steaks, rolling roast meat, roasts and things like that, as well as going to food trade school, which was a school like butchers and chefs had to go to. And it was a system where employers would hire these young kids and that for peanuts, but they had to be teaching them the trade, and the food trade school would test all the kids to make sure some employers would just use kids, teach them nothing, and just have them washing out tubs or cleaning floors sort of thing. So that was the way they would monitor it, or the government would. And that was it, I think. I started learning more about anatomy with the butchers, like, cutting heads off pigs and things like that. There's a method to it. And so it just, every little thing my boss taught me there, I was just fascinated with how bones joined together, where they connected, how they connected with the tendons that were around them and so on. And that was...
That's where you first saw a professional boner come in and do his job.
Yeah. I know it has different, meanings here, the term boner, but in Australia, it's somebody that just bones out, either cattle or sheep, and some do chickens and whatever, but or pigs. But one time, and I don't remember why, but we had a massive amount of beef quarters in there, and we couldn't get them processed in time, so they would lose them. So they had to get someone in to bone them out quickly, so we could freeze all the sections of meat. And they hired this guy, and he came in, and he had a chainmail arm guard on, and a chainmail glove, and a hook in his left hand, and he just demolished all this beef and just took it apart so fast. I was just fascinated with that. Anybody could take meat apart that quickly. So from there on,
So after your apprenticeship, you went on to work in meat processing plants and doing pet meeting in the field. How do those experiences help you with your sculpting?
It helped me a lot. I mean, from working as a butcher in a supermarket, in a butcher shop, and then going to work in a meat packing plant where you're just boning, you're not slicing steak or anything, it's wholesale sort of, so you're just taking the bones out and doing, it's large numbers. You get paid by the piece, not by the hour. So, back then, like my fascination with bones, I soon got over that. When you're boning sheep in South Australia, you do 25 to 30 an hour, like 40, 50,000 sheep a year you're taking the bones out of. You forget about the interest in bones. But, or cattle would be 10 to 15 head of cattle a day, So, but it helped a lot. There was a lot of, I found later on in taxidermy and sculpting, there's a lot of recall there. There's like jigsaw puzzles that you've done over and over so many times, and you don't have to think about it. You look at something and it all just falls together for you,
Why don't you talk about these guys here?
This is in the field in the Northern Territory in Australia. boning. You can see the bottom picture, that's a feral bull. One side, all the meat's gone, then we'd roll it over and do the other side. Back then I'd do one of these in about 17 minutes. The top there, I'm working with a guy I worked with. You can see, it's hot, work is in the tropics. So that's why I got no shirt on. He's barefoot. He's got a bandage around his leg. I accidentally stabbed him through the calf muscle. And just for the record, I don't wear these shorts anymore.
So this is hard work. This is like sun up to sundown 7 days a week, right?
Yeah, you just camped out there. It's just full on all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And I'll tell you that they gave us black and white images here to kind of save our sensibilities because it's a little gory looking.
Yeah.
So in the late 70s, you came to the U.S. for the first time to compete in the rodeo.
Yeah.
And once you were here, you met a couple of taxidermists, and that chance encounter kind of changed the course of your life, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I went to Northern California in '79, and I'd met a guy from their horseshoe, actually in Australia, at a rodeo, and he invited me over, so I stayed with him for a couple of weeks, and then I'd previously been doing rodeo since the age of 15 in Australia. Started riding bulls and bareback broncs, and then at 17 started steer wrestling or bulldogging. They use that term as well. So that's why I came to California.
This is what everybody from Australia is like.
Right. But so then after doing that, I can't remember how many rodeos I went to, maybe only half a dozen or so, but I met a couple of taxidermists and became friends with them, and then worked for them skinning out deer heads and birds and things like that because I was fairly competent with a knife, so that came easy to me. And I was fascinated, and I learnt the taxidermy while I was there, and I always, I loved natural history museums when I was a kid, so it was right up my alley. So then when I went back to Australia, I continued with that part-time as well as back working in meatworks and so on.
Let's talk about some of your rodeo experiences.
This is, for those of you who don't understand, the steer wrestling is you come out on horseback galloping after a steer. When you get off the horse, catch them, spin them around and throw them down. This is what's happening here. This is outside of Melbourne. Yeah, 73. I was 17, I think, 17 or 18 at that time. Later on, there's some other images where you'll see me on horseback coming out. That's the beginning, but it's just there's a separation of 10 years between these pictures and the next ones. So here's this is how you start out. The steer comes out of the chute. You're galloping after them to catch them and throw them down. Hopefully in a short time. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Do you have a couple of bruises and?
I did. I dislocated my shoulder. I took a chip of bone out of a hip socket. Just a few concussions. Just nothing real major. Like I've had other friends that got injured.
You did.
I got off light.
You did go home from your first rodeo in an ambulance, though.
Yeah. A horse jumped on my back. But other friends, I'm. With hindsight now, I'm so glad I wasn't a champion at that because it would have been hard to quit. When I see friends that were really good, they got really beat up over the years, So.
Okay, well, let's move on to taxidermy. Tell us about your experience there and how that introduced you to sculpting. So boning is taking animals apart. Taxidermy is putting them back together. Isn't that right?
Yeah. It's doing taxidermy in Australia in those days, there were no supply companies. Like in this country, you have taxidermy supply companies, and if somebody wants to mount a deer head and a left turn, right turn, whatever, and the sizes, they can just order a polyurethane foam mannequin. In Australia, I couldn't do that. So at first I started carving out of foam. I would just carve the heads and put the antlers on and mount the skins on. And I had to do all my own skin tanning and that as well. But then I started wiring skeletons together and doing complete sculptures in plastiline modeling clay, what I use now in sculptures.
How's that translate?
Oh, yeah. Here it is. You can see this on the left, that's an articulated skeleton. The skull is white because the rest of the bones, I don't need to clean them. I just soak them in a solution to somewhat preserve the meat, so I wanted to leave tendons that attach so it would hold the skeleton together. The skull, obviously, I've boiled it to clean it. This picture here is the clay model where I've cut the antlers out. That is ready to be molded. From there, a fiberglass mold is made in which you pour polyurethane foam into. That's a foam model on the top there, out of there. The bottom picture of the mount, the head is different because this client didn't want the head with the mouth open and thrown back like that, so I had to alter it. But this is basically the process of how it all works. This is out of terracotta clay, sculpting a Brahman bull head for taxidermy, which would be molded later. The terracotta I started with because I couldn't find plastiline clay, but you had to spray it with water and cover it in wet towels every day, so it's something you have to get to pretty quick, whereas other pieces I could leave there for weeks or months, while I worked on them. These are some finished pieces. This is an axis deer on the left and it's a hog deer on the right. They're the finished clay models, so they just need, from there, the skull cap is cut out and smoothed out, and then a fiberglass mold is made of that. And you can see the lines all look pretty hard. From here, taxidermists will, glue goes over it like a paste, and then the skin, and they adjust the hide into place. So it's more like scientific sculpting. Everything has to fit. I mean, it's...
So these are commercially available mannequins,
yes,
that taxidermists buy to use as the basis for their taxidermy.
Yes, I sculpted quite a few in Australia there and some in Texas. And they're still used by taxidermists all around this country, here and overseas too. I still get paid royalties for them. So, but I learned a lot here by putting these, like I'd been taking all these animals apart in meatworks and then putting all these skeletons back together and building the muscles back up, and that was a different sort of an education, but it was beneficial to me.
So how long were you in the taxidermy trade?
I did taxidermy from 79 until 2003, but I did it full-time from, I think it was 85 to 2006, yeah.
So what have we got here?
Oh, this is, with sculpting these mannequins, these are all death masks of different species. You can see in the very center, that brown looking one, that is the chest of a red kangaroo, which is really interesting because they're built like humans. They have collarbones and that, so they've got pectoral muscles and their biceps, everything looks like a human. Really interesting creatures. So there's all different species there. These masks help when you're sculpting taxidermy mannequins as a reference aid. It's because the animal is dead, the skin is sagged and the eyes are hollowed out and that. So, you'd use photos of live animals in the death mask, but there's a lot of really good information there, So it's, from this kind of work, I learned to read reference, and I think reading reference, like everything, is ongoing. You get better at it over the years. But it helps a lot with these. I don't use these hardly anymore now. I used to be very tight with measurements. I'd make armatures and that and whittle bones out of wood. So I'd had all the bones so they all articulated where the joints were and so on. But I don't do that anymore either. And I find more and more I just do it by eye. Or how many head lengths, like the length of an animal's body is to how high it is and so on,
Tell us a little bit about how you moved into fine art sculpture.
In the early 80s, my ex-wife, she got interested in doing a bronze sculpture first, and she did several rodeo figures, and she'd ask me, pointers about the anatomy and that, because I was working in meatworks then, so I'd help her out with where the bones went and everything like that, and then I got interested in it, like pretty much with the taxidermy. Once I started sculpting more mannequins and got better, I was more interested in sculpting mannequins than the taxidermy side of it, So
the market for sculpture and over in Australia is considerably different than over here.
Yeah, from what I could tell, there wasn't much of a market for representational sculpture there. And I started selling a few pieces each year, but I knew it would be beneficial for me to be over here.
So you came back here to the U.S. in 2003. What took place there?
I had a friend I used to rodeo with. He had a silver business in Mexico. I had a factory in Guadalajara, Mexico, but his business was in Texas. And I came over a few times and took a trailer and truck on the road to sell jewelry and cowboy buckles and that at different shows. And I'd sell some of my sculptures, and then I realized I needed to be here. So I applied for an O1 visa and took a few months, and I got that. So then I moved around about April in 2003. I moved over here. I've lived here full-time since then. Worked for a taxidermist first, just south of Fort Worth in Texas. And I'd do some clay models of little sculptures in there. And then some of his clients would come in and started buying sculptures from me. Then I got a commission for a big piece, and it just went on from there. So then it all changed. I think 2006 I finished with the taxidermy and just focused on the sculpting bronzes.
So let's talk a little bit about the sculpture process.
Right, this piece actually was here last year at the show. It won the Bob Coon Wildlife Award. This is the Marquette. You can see the clay model there. The antlers are missing because I don't need them for this. But I'm making the armature for this moose there, which it's life size, or some people say it's bigger than life size, but you know, it's how big is a man? You got a jockey or a basketball player. This would be the basketball player of the moose. So I just, because I don't have bones or anything, I would just weld up an armature like that. Bones, it doesn't have to be elaborate. I'm a pretty bad welder. But you're not going to see it. So structurally, as long as it holds together, there's some wire, bird wire wrapped around that the foam will stick to help fill it up. This one, in case I sprayed foam on it first off, usually I'll cut out a whole bunch of little squares of plastic and mix up in cups the two-part mixture of foam, and I'll pour it on that plastic. And as it starts to build up, I'll pick up that piece of plastic, I'll walk over and I'll put it on the armature, on the wire or steel, hold it there for a moment, and then mix up more, keep building up all this foam until I can tear all that plastic off and keep building it up more. And then I'll use a sawzall and a butcher knife and just carve it all back until I get my man. Oh, here you can see it here, the start of this foam here. Here it has all been whittled and carved back, and then putting the clay all over the model and finishing it.
Then we move on to the molding process.
Yeah, this is not a fun part. It's I have another guy that makes molds for me, but he wasn't available. And then I tried some other people, and nobody could do it in the time I needed. So I said, the guy that does said, well, can you spare some time? And so he said he could do a day or two a week. So I worked on it with him. And when he wasn't there, I've made molds before. I used to make all my own molds years ago, but it took a lot. It's 88 pieces for that, and all of these pieces are individually painted. These rubber molds are all painted in wax. You can see the top. The sections are carded, then the rubber is painted over, and here are the plaster panels, which is the mother mold that supports the rubber, is over the top. Then the whole lot is laid out here, as you can see. In the foundry, each section has wax painted into it, like probably 1/4 of an inch thick, something like that. And then that's some of those panels you can see up the top left. Wax is painted in there. Here they've taken them out of the mold, and they put those stems are all sprues. That helps to funnel the bronze into the wax panel. The far right is those panels that have been dipped in ceramic shell. They usually, it varies, but about 8 dippings, drying for a day between each dipping before they have it looks like a bunch of cement all over it. Then they put it in a furnace and melt the wax out, and then they take that panel and they'll pour the molten bronze into that panel, and all those sprues and that are cut off. You can see here sections of this moose where it's welded and put together. All that welding has to be chased back with little die grinders.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the finished piece, and yeah, this here I'm starting to do the patina. So it's
and then the finished piece.
and that's at the client's home. It's in Colorado.
So you've got this sculpture of giant squirrel called
Oh, yeah.
Reclining Nude. I like to joke that this is probably the only nude that you're ever going to see in a Masters of the American West. So how do you sculpt an animal when animals don't really want to pose for you?
I've always had an active imagination, and I find that like when I was a kid, and I guess lots of kids do, they pretend they're an animal, they're on the carpet or out on the lawn on hands and knees and pretend they're a horse or a dog or whatever. And I did that a lot, and I find I still do that, not literally on my hands and knees, but in my head, in my mind. When I'm sculpting something like this, I just imagine that, and that's how I work out how on the back, you can't see from there, but if you look at it in the show, the scapula is on the back of the shoulders, working out how all that comes together. It's just through my imagination, just pretending I'm in that position. And I do the same if I sculpt a bison. I try to get into character of being such a big, heavy animal with all that gravity and the movement and how it would feel to be like you have the all that power as well as the weight. And it seems to work for me. Or, doing a white-tailed deer that's leaping. I mean, that athletic feeling. And I imagine, I haven't spoke to or asked other artists about that, but I imagine others must do it too. I think, you could be an old heavy man and sculpt ballerinas and just in your mind just jump like that and imagine it,
So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of your professional career as a sculptor. First off, I think we're looking at your studio right now.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
These are just, all the horns and antlers and that are just aids, like reference aids with, I went through a period there where I wasn't too focused on the horns and antlers and for some reason, and then come away from that and realize I needed to pay more attention on it. I find with the background that I've had with the taxidermy, the boning and all that stuff, my early focus was all on anatomy, getting the anatomy better and better, and then you get to a point where you think, well, you can go too far. I mean, there's just too much going on. It gets too busy, and then it's, well, what do you leave out? So something might, a smudge in a certain area might suffice instead of creating a vein there or another bone or some kind of muscle that would be there. So that's what I found is a difficult part, is just knowing what to leave out and having enough there to create interest. So I use these aids, the horns and antlers. They help a lot, and not that I do anything exactly like any one of them. It's just basically the angles and that it gives me and that. So this is my main studio. I have another one where those pictures of the moose were at the back of my property. It's slightly larger. So yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the people that kind of led you through your career as a fine art sculptor.
Well, I think a fortunate meeting for me was a guy I had called Martin Wood, Bubba Wood, people call him, in Dallas, Texas. He had a gallery called Collector's Covey, and it probably was the preeminent sporting art gallery in the country. I think it closed a few years back. But he was he's a serious outdoorsman, done a lot of hunting, fishing, shotgun shooting and that, and he had a lot of he collected all the best artists he could find. I mean, Tim Schinneberger was represented by him and Walter Matthau as well. But he enjoyed being involved with the artists, and he was a great critic, and he enjoyed critiquing. And it worked out for me. I've never been really thin-skinned about that. My parents were very sarcastic, and so I grew up with all this stuff. So we clicked, and it worked out well because he would come to my studio and look at pieces in the clay, and we'd debate it or argue about it, and it helped me a lot getting an honest opinion from someone else. Instead of people just saying that's nice sort of thing, but you always wonder, what does somebody really think, or what do they notice? And it's not that he wasn't a sculptor, but he just had a really good eye. And I remember one time I had a small white-tailed deer, and he said to me, the head's too big. I said, well, it's not too big. He said, well, it looks too big. I said, well, that's different. And when he left, I started looking at it, and then I worked out that the lip line was too short. And then suddenly, as I lengthened the line of the lip, the head suddenly came into perspective. And it all fell together then, sort of thing. So he was right, and I was right. And at that time, I knew I was right because I'd measured all the length of every bone and skull and everything in that piece, sort of thing. So that's why I've moved away from getting too technical with all the measurements now. And I find I still, even if I don't use all the measurements just by eye, I've done quite a few pieces and then looked at them later and put a tape measure on them and been surprised how accurate it is just going by eye then, you know. So
you did some time with Joe Wade too, right?
Yeah, I started Collector's Covey. That's where I met a lot of different collectors at his shows, miniature shows. Joe Wade Fine Art in Santa Fe represented me. Then Stu Johnson at Settlers West in Tucson. I met a lot of people there. And there's the National Wildlife Museum here. The Autry has been great. Alan Fammer is a fine art dealer from Houston. It all just came together and snowballed.
Let's talk about how your sculpture style has evolved over time. There we go.
Oh yeah, fun parts. As you can see back there, they were very smooth, and I got to the point. I thought, although I'd seen an exhibition in Brisbane, in Australia, was an Animalure exhibition, and I think it was in 1983, which was very exciting. I loved seeing them piece, and they're all smooth. They didn't have a loose texture at all. But as I started doing more sculptures, I got to the point where I thought, I'm just creating little miniature models, little replicas. This isn't art. It's just a little mini model of an animal. So I was trying to get a looser texture, and obviously that's very smooth. Here I already thought I was getting a bit looser, and there I definitely thought I was getting looser. I look at them now and they're so tight, But it's not easy. I mean, I've known other artists make comments that, well, I had one at a show a few years ago, commented to a friend of mine, if I left them unfinished like that, I could do 20 a month. And I thought, yeah, they wouldn't look like that though. You can see here, this kangaroo is a little bit looser, the burro and the cougar, and it keeps changing. I mean, my texture keeps evolving, and sometimes it varies from piece to piece, depending on the size and that. See, with the warthog, the desert ram. And of course, when you do something like the armadillo, trying to show these bands on a 9-banded armadillo, it's all, well, how do you do that without literally doing every little mark on there? Improvising. But, these are later pieces. The African buffalo up there, elk, and German short-hair pointer, and the lion. Well, the lion was here last year, the Autry show. This is a red stag. I got a commission. You can see the marquette behind me in this picture here, and a collector bought that, and then he wanted a half life-size one in his garden, so I just sculpted this one here. And there I am installing the piece. As a similar thing happened, this was called Heading North, this steer here, and that's just a small piece. And a collector bought one and asked if I would do a life-size one for him. So I said, yeah, and then you can see here this where I'm cutting out the foam. I've reversed the legs in the front and turned the head the other way, so it wasn't identical to this small one. Here it is in the bronze. You can see there's still a plate missing out of the top of its head where they got stainless steel bars in the horns coming together where they weld them together. And there it is wrapped in plastic being put on a location. And this is in the University of Texas golf course in Austin. And this was here a couple of years ago, the clay model of this American icon. There's a side view. It's hollow in the back there, and there's another view of it in the garden. But I like the texture on this, how it turned out.
So let's talk a little bit about researching your subjects in real life.
Yeah, this was a company in Dallas, and they had a field across the road that they owned. They had a herd of longhorn cows there and a couple of bulls. And this black bull, when it was born, they had a competition for naming it, and boy, I can't even think. Excel, that was the name. Just about the company motto, excelling. It was a marketing company, so they wanted me to sculpt this bull, and this is 2 years old at the time. And a 2-year-old bull is an immature animal, and they wanted this sculpture. And I said, this is one of the owners, and I said, well, I'll do the bull, but I mean, I'd like to do him how he's going to look in 5 years, you know. He's going to have, you know, several £100 extra on him, sort of thing. And they kind of trusted me, luckily, and I went with it, you know, because they don't. A 2-year-old doesn't have the power in the shoulders and the neck or anything like that. But I built it up to what a mature bull would look like, and it was interesting because it was several years later. Somebody showed me something on Facebook, a picture of the bull, how it looked now, and he looked like the sculpture then. And then I sent them pictures of how it looked at the time, and they were amazed at the difference between this 2-year-old bull to what the bull looked like then, you know. So
how about this bad boy?
Yeah, rhino. I never used to think too much about them, you know. But then, you know, I met some biologists and that, and being around them, I just find them fascinating animals. This is the black rhino. You can't see here because I'm feeding him, but you can see that the lip, they have a prehensile lip that hangs off, and that's because they're mainly browsers, browsing on thorn bush and that. These are the most aggressive of all the rhino species. This is what Teddy Roosevelt hunted in Africa and that, and they're solo animals. They don't hang around together because they don't like each other unless it's the breeding season, and the males will kill other ones, you know, quite often too. So that's why they're so endangered, because of their aggressive nature. But anyway, I wanted to, because it's the black rhino, and I was trying to come up with a composition. I thought how I came up with this, with his head up higher and he's coming forward, this was called brute force. The tail up, I just wanted to get all that forward momentum, just that aggression coming out, and I thought it worked pretty well in that piece. Yeah, textual. I'd love to do this piece in a life size. I think it would be great.
Well, let's go to my favorite subject matter, puppy dogs.
Oh, yeah. This was a police dog. I was trying to do a Malinois dog. So for the Fort Worth Police Department, they have a training complex south of Fort Worth, and a businessman wanted to buy them a dog there because they had this, it was like they had this new police academy built, and there were all these stones with all these names on it. He had asked, what are all these names? And these are all dogs that have died or killed in action. And he wanted to donate this dog. So when I talked with some of the officers, and I said, well, could you bring a dog out to my studio or something? And then I had 3 police cars, 3 black and white vehicles pull up in front of my studio, get out, all of them with dogs. And I could just imagine the neighbors just looking. I knew nobody makes a living off. Yeah. They're dealing drugs or something, you know. But so anyway, I just picked one of the dogs that I use as a model, and this was him here with his mouth open. And a few times he left the dog there with me too. And again, it's not that dog exactly, you know. I'm looking at other photos and that too, you know. But it helps a lot having an animal there like that.
So my second favorite subject, puppies on surfboards.
This was a couple from Hawaii wanted to donate a dog, a bigger than life-size dog, to a school, Puna House School in Honolulu. And they sent me a picture of this dog here, and they used him for duck hunting and everything. And so it's an American lab. So here I am carving the foam piece. So I didn't do a marquette or anything. I just went straight to carving the foam and then sculpting the larger piece, and we shipped it over there. You can see it on the right there.
Well, let's go to Africa.
Yeah, so again, always fascinating to handle big cats and, you know, or the big bovines, megafauna. So this was in Namibia. Yeah, Namibia. And this park where I got to take all these measurements of this cat. Of course, I didn't do anything with it until 2020 when I sculpted that piece there. But it was this was interesting, not the sculpting the cheetah, but how to support it, you know, like with all the feet off the ground. And I would have tried branches, like coming off their thin branch, touching the feet, coming up, touching the stifle joint there back on the ground in a few places, and it just didn't work for me. It was like at anchor points, pulling on it, just slowing it down. And then I tried so many things. Then finally, I came up with this arc, and I felt that the arc worked because the cat is just sliding over it. There's nothing impeding the movement. It just slides over it, you know, instead of just stopping there. So sometimes I struggle. My biggest struggles, it was how to support some of these, like the shark I have in the show here too. I found that took me quite a while to figure out what I was going to do about supporting that.
How about this?
Okay, there we're out with the anti-poaching patrol, the rhino anti-poaching patrol, specifically in southeast Zimbabwe. That was interesting to see. You know, if you go to a zoo or something, these animals are standing around not moving, but to see the wild ones out there and when they're trotting and running around, when they get stirred up and that by a presence was pretty interesting. And that, so then I decided to sculpt a white rhino. You can see down this picture how wide their muzzle is, and the other black rhino has a very narrow muzzle. When I explained that prehensile lip, they call them white rhino. It was a Dutch meaning wide mouth, and then the English just took it as the word white, the color, or lack of color. But so that's the big difference. And these rhino aren't as endangered as the black because they're friendly. The biologists have said they have a personality like horses, and they hang out in herds and that, and they're quite manageable. They're not that aggressive sort of thing. Although they look more dinosaur-like. They've got these big humps on the back of their head that looks like all these knobs. That they look pretty interesting, but they just don't have the aggression or the agility of the black rhinos. So there's the finished white rhino. Yeah, I was trying to put I saw them where they're trotting and just like you'd see a horse trot, and where they're just feeling all this vigor and that, and that's why I've got his tail turned around like that, and how his head is pulled in a bit there, just trying to show that little bouncy gait as he's moving along there. Yeah, as you can see, that's got different texture on this again than the previous black rhino. It's just evolved. Not that I'm doing anything consciously, but it just turns out different at times. So here's some, a caracal, pangolin. They're another endangered animal, the pangolins. Very cool. Here I was just showing there's a hippo track, with the 4 toes, and there's a rhino track just with the 3 toes, the difference, the size of them. And of course, just looking at warthog up there, that was in Mozambique, I think. They're all fast. I haven't sculpted a pangolin yet or a caracal or anything, but one day I might, but it's always exciting to handle different animals. And that's a femur of an elephant, and this is in Savudi in Botswana, and it's everyone says the Botswana elephants are the largest bodied elephants on the continent of Africa, and this one surprised me because it was so big. I've picked up other ones in Mozambique where we've out there in the bush and we've found skeletons that poachers have killed, and that I've picked up other bones, but they were nowhere near the size of this, so I was kind of excited about this. It must have, it had to be like 70, 80 pound, it felt like. Yeah, it's taken quite a bit of effort to pick it up. Yeah, there you can see a scapula behind me there, yeah.
So Mick hopes that viewers of his work will connect with the sculptures in some way. Feeling the essence of the animal is what he likes to say, and notice the subtle nuances of the shape, the motion, and the character in each piece. So thank you, Mick.
Thank you.
We welcome any questions that anybody in the audience may have. What? We have a question. Marjorie.
What's on your wish list? What do you going forward?
As I go along, I think of different things all the time. I've got things my head's swimming with different ideas, and some will just stay there for several years sometimes, and then something else will remind me of that, or a different idea. You know, that hammerhead shark I have on the show here, I thought about that about 15 years ago, and I had an image in my mind of how I wanted to do it, and it was like just a slight arc to it, and then as I started doing it, suddenly I thought, no, this could be better with a bit more of a twist. And then the twist got stronger and stronger, and then got to twist it that hard. Well, then I got to flick the tail the other way, because you've got to show the force, how they're maneuvering, how they propel themselves, and it just evolves from there, sort of thing. And so that's how most things I do. They just sort of evolve. I come up with an idea and figure out the composition I want, and start the armature, and then go for it. Most reference I'll use will be just pictures of feet or eyes or something very close, not like of an overall composition. I guess like a painter might use of a horse standing there or galloping or something. That's not what I use for reference. You know, I make up the motion, whatever it is. Yeah. That's it.
If anyone else has a question, I have a microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, right there.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, with a given piece, and it probably varies from piece to piece and maybe depending on size, but how much time are you spending, like, as an artist, in the clay, and then through, obviously, I was very interested to see your process, the molding process, and then the finishing patina. Like, if you had to assign on average, you know, a percentage of your time at each phase, and I recognize that having a good foundry probably takes care of the latter half for you in some degree, but how does that usually shake out?
You know, I don't time myself when I'm working on a sculpture. The clay work is not, oh boy, like a piece like that rhino, you know, 50 inches long, sort of, you know, in a couple of weeks, I've got that pretty much done. Most things are there, and it's the editing, the tweaking, the staring at it that takes all the time. I mean, I don't want to just think it's done, make a mold of it. I think it's like if somebody's writing a book or some sort of a manuscript, and they write it and they think this is great, and then they look at the next day and think, oh well, I got to change this paragraph, or this could be better. And then you look at it the next day and, well, yeah, you could, and you can go on and on and on. You know, it's a matter of knowing when to enough's enough, sort of thing. And for me, that's when a couple of weeks will go by with me looking at it, and I can't think of another thing that I can do to it to enhance it. You know.
Then you go to the foundry, and how involved are you with the foundry?
I will generally, with the molding, I will talk with a guy about where they're going to have the seam lines and so on. And that there's so many different ways of making a mold, and so many, you know, it's. I don't like to have a seam going over an eye or a critical place, because when they pour the waxes and chasing the waxes, it can always be an issue there, you know, that frustrates me. So I like to see where the seams are going to go. With the foundry work, it's the same thing. Sometimes matching my texture when they weld up all the seams, and they'll use a big grinder, get down, then a smaller grinder, and then finally with a little tiny die grinder the size of a pen, and match my texture. And then if you get a new guy in there and he's doing something, and he looks at this, and this is all a big mess, especially in raw bronze, and that texture just looks like a mess. And then I just go like this, and I come and look, and this is not how it's meant to be, sort of thing. So I'll have to get in there, take the grinder, and show them how to chase it. And not with everybody, you know, experienced people can do it fine, but, you know, occasionally you get some people that haven't done that, and that can be a little bit frustrating. But most people get it when you show them. And that. Has that answered it?
Yeah.
Hopefully? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi, welcome.
I don't know if that's necessary. I don't see anywhere where you've made drawings, and I suspect it's really all up here in your head.
Yeah.
You just have a feeling of the shapes and the dimensions.
Yeah.
Make out dimensions, but I think
Yeah.
it's all in your head.
Yes, it is. I mean, yeah, I don't. Obviously, drawing is great, and as a kid, I drew all the time. In school, all my books, every spare bit of paper had pictures of horses and dogs all over them. Sort of all these doodles everywhere, sort of thing. As I got older, at first when I was doing taxidermy and sculpting mannequins, sometimes I would. I found that if I drew, you could have a photo of a deer or something, like say just a head, just a dead head there of a deer, and doing a sketch of that sometimes gave me more information than the photo would. So I understand the use of it there, but at this point now, I mean, put it this way, with hindsight now, yeah, it would be beneficial, I think, for anybody wanting to be a sculptor to draw, to sketch and that, it's got to help. I mean, all these things that I've just shown you here, this has taken me a long time. I mean, I'm no savant. I mean, it's just taken a lot of trial and error. I'm self-taught pretty much, and when you learn yourself, it's the long road. It takes a lot longer to get there, but at a certain point, once you get there, you've made so many mistakes. You know why things don't work because you've tried them all. And that's how I feel, sort of thing. It's just taken a long time, and that's why I'm not worried about sketching now, because I have it in my head. I know where I want to go with it, sort of thing. So,
Yeah, I think that goes back to the story of the head's too big. It feels too big.
Yes, exactly.
After a while, the material talks to you.
Well, it's, if you think of, I've often thought like an analogy of, you look at runway models walking down a runway, and all those photographers there with those fast shutter speed, they're clicking off those pictures, and you see this elegant woman walk down this aisle, and at the end she turns around. Now in some of those clicks, some of those images are going to look awkward just as she's turning. The woman is not awkward, but just that turn. And then some artists can get stuck, whether it's with an animal, an awkward moment, but their brain tells them it's absolutely true. It's right. It's 100% because there's the photo. So there's no confusion, they think. But there is, because a split second before or a split second later, the images could be much better, the balance, everything like that,
I love the subtle difference between this one and the mean looking.
The black one, yeah.
Yeah, that's a real palpable difference.
Yes, there is. Yeah. So up there?
Way back in the corner.
Oh, I thought, yeah?
Oh, is there something else?
But, yeah, I'll be right on these.
So how did the cat measure you? How did the cat let you measure it?
I asked them if they had tame cheetahs, and they said semi-tame. I said, okay. And they were laying around quiet, and at one point when I put the tape over his head, then he just turned around and went to bite me, sort of thing, But luckily I have cat-like quickness, But yeah, for the most part, they're okay. The cheetahs, I think, are pretty quiet animals, and of course they don't have the claws to grab you. That, to me, would be scarier, trying that with a leopard or something that can actually grab hold of you. I had a friend several years back in Darwin in Australia, and he sent me pictures. I could show you later on my phone, very graphic, of he was with some friends at the zoo, and there was a lioness there, and he stuck his hand through the bars to scratch her behind the ear, and this lioness just grabbed his arm, and he's a big man, big arm, and what she took out of his arm, and she wouldn't let go, flipping around and spinning around, and thought, boy, yeah.
But so my question is then, they don't have claws, cheetahs?
No, not retractable. They got claws like a dog,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I was wondering how they catch things.
Yeah. Well, like a dog catches animals, will hold them with their feet and that too, but they can't hold them with their claws, Like they can't get up trees or anything, So.
Did he win a Darwin Award?
No, I think you've got to die to win that.
Eligible for it.
Yeah, I think you have to die to win a Darwin Award. Be taken out of the gene pool. Right up the back there.
Yes, back here, and we do appreciate everyone using their mics because then we can record it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What animal would you like to sculpt that you have not had a chance to sculpt yet, but you plan to at some point?
Boy,
There has to be one that you look at in the wild and you have to do it.
well, I've done most of the animals I would like to do. I mean, would like to sculpt more elephants. I have some different ideas for elephants, especially because realizing how well they can climb in really steep mountains and that. Where one time on this trail coming down in Zimbabwe off this escarpment, and me and this government game scout with me, and we're sliding on our butts down this trail, grabbing hold of vines and things. It was so steep, and it was a trail that elephants walked up. And you look at that and you think, how does an animal that big walk up an incline like that? But they do. So there's those Indian gaur. They're the biggest bovine in the world. I mean, they would be a fascinating subject too. But it all depends. Bison are awesome. There's lots of different things I'd like to do with bison too, and I still love all the deer species around, elk, everything like that too. So, yeah, you're welcome.
I have another question over here.
Mick, you touched on it a little bit, but can you talk about how when I think of an animal sculpture, how do you get the reference? How do you get the left side the same as the right side, or know which, like in this one shown up here, you have the right front leg going in one direction, the back left another, but you're mainly looking at 2D reference. How do you bring it to life? How do you make it accurate 3D without literally standing over the animal while you're doing it?
That's as I said earlier, from boning animals, or you have an animal on the ground. If you have a dog laying on the ground and you move his scapula, his legs around, you realize that scapula is floating. The front legs are not attached to the main frame of the animal, sort of thing, unless they have a collarbone. But so you can work out lots of things like that. And even, as I said, pretending I'm the animal, how I'd move a leg in a certain way. Of course I'm not built like that, but there's a lot of information there that comes through, and that's, it would be a struggle if I had to find a left and a right photo to match. It would be just about impossible. And you see pieces that will, where I've seen sculptors do pieces where they've got muscles, tense muscles where they should be relaxed, and when they're picking a leg off the ground, and they'll have the muscles going the same way on both sides, even one leg's off the ground, sort of thing. But you can, I just get a feel for it. I just imagine I'm the animal, and that seems to work for me. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to.
It's an intuitive process.
Yeah, I don't know how else I could explain that for you.
I had a quick question about size and scale in your work. Most of the animals are of a certain, dimensions. They're big, and they're sort of these charismatic megafauna, as you said. And even the squirrel that you did for us this year is like 4 times the size of a regular squirrel. Is there a reason why do the bigger animals interest you so much more than the smaller ones? I haven't seen a fox or a bunny or a chinchilla or something like that. Why? The big animals.
They're just my experience. Like the pet meeting, the hunting wild cattle and buffalo. And when you're chasing animals, these big, powerful animals. they're just awesome. There's just something, so incredible about them. Like even when you see them get up and rub mud on a tree or something like that, it's just big, massive bones and that. They're just, it's. Some people like spiders and lizards and geckos and that, and they're all interesting, but I'm attracted to mainly those large animals, sort of thing, and the movement of them. So I feel like I'm not very good at answering these questions, but
You're doing great. I think
Yes.
you've got one back up here.
there's one.
Where is it? Oh, thank you.
We're gonna make you run.
I'm gonna ask you to see again. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna ask you to see again. Yes.
So I apologize. I came in about 10 minutes late, so I may have missed something. But have you ever sculpted, or will you ever sculpt, the fiercest predator on Earth, Homo sapiens?
I did a football coach for the University of Houston. Not real. I've done, years ago, I did some nude sculptures, a handful, and they're all interesting too. I mean, it's, I'm just more interested in animals. Plenty of people do humans. Humans would be easier, I think, because you have people will model for you, and you can get someone to pose there and get shots all the way around, sort of thing, which you don't get with an animal. You have to work it out. But and not to say I'll never do that. I mean, if some idea, I come up with a good idea, I would do it. But yeah, I've just been, since a kid, I've just been nuts about animals. Yeah. So anyone else?
Well, thank you, Mick, for telling us about sculpting from the inside out.
Good.
Thank you for joining us. Have a good rest of the time at the Masters of the American West.